The Scottish media have had a difficult few weeks. The Sunday Herald, which came out for yes in the independence referendum, has found itself under attack on social media by many of its loyal readers who feel the paper misrepresented the recent pro-independence march in Glasgow. Meanwhile, the former First Minister, Alex Salmond, has told party activists that he had a blind spot over alleged BBC bias and that Nicola Sturgeon won't make the same mistake. Defenders of the so-called mainstream media warn that journalistic freedom is under threat. Graham Stewart reports.
On the editorial floor, stories and pictures are coming in from all over the world. Here are the reporters, the sub-editors, the fiction and sports departments.
Once a respected pillar of Scottish democracy, Scotland's newspapers were read by nearly everyone and were at the cutting edge of technology.
It must have taken quite a while to get news from America in those days, didn't it?
It was very slow. I booked about 14 days.
How long does it take today to get news from America?
Oh, we can get news flashes in seconds, and we can even get pictures in 8 minutes.
But now it's not just circulation figures under attack, but the legitimacy of the mainstream media itself. The latest controversy surrounds this month's pro-independence rally, when tens of thousands marched peacefully through Glasgow. But the Sunday Herald led with this image, showing an alleged confrontation with pro-union supporters. A complete misrepresentation, said many nationalists, who believe it falsely suggested equal numbers of yes and no supporters. The former First Minister reflected the views of many by saying he'd cancelled his subscription to the paper. When the Sunday Herald's editor published an explanation the following week, it only served to set social media alight. Staff claimed they were shouted at over the phone, with one email suggesting they'd be skinned alive. So why such a strong attack on what is, after all, a pro-independence paper?
For the nearly 50%, we could argue about it, of the population who support independence, there is one Sunday paper. And for a long time, there was just one paper, and it was the Sunday Herald. So that precious little child is something that people feel very strongly attached to. There's been a slow burn of a few wee things, and I think that's what has made people feel totally disappointed at the paper. And it's hard to see now how they come back from that, actually.
Journalists have told me the situation here has been toxic over the last couple of weeks. Now, it's very difficult to tell how much of this online chat feeds through to the real world, but if a newspaper were to be taken down by its own readership, that would be unprecedented.
This is a journalist who's taken it upon himself to defend the mainstream media, arguing that press freedom is under attack. The result has been a furious Twitter storm, with some even accusing him of working for MI5.
This is very much a minority thing. It isn't reflective, for example, of the wider Yes movement or of independent supporters who are have perfectly legitimate concerns about us. But there is a slight little tension now about, do people respect a free press?
Shouldn't you just grow a thicker skin?
If you're in my line of work or a new line of work, you have to have a thick skin, and that's fine. Criticism is good. We welcome criticism. However, most of the attacks, and that's the word I'm using deliberately right now, come at those parts of the media which are fair, which are perhaps either ambivalent about independence or not outright hostile to it, or indeed parts of the media and the new media which support independence. And that's strange.
An important question I have to ask you. Are you a member of the intelligence services?
I am not.
David Leask's online adversary says the newspapers only have themselves to blame.
I thought the Sunday Herald's front cover was quite badly judged, but it was the reaction to it that was really catastrophic. I mean, if your customers are angry at you, you don't spend the next week having a madman scream at them on social media about how they're just a bunch of paranoid lunatics. The Scottish political media has undermined itself. If it had been doing a remotely competent job for the last 5 or 6 years, I'd have no material. Wings Over Scotland wouldn't exist. It wouldn't have 300,000 readers, and it wouldn't have raised £750,000 from people who clearly think it's doing a job that needs to be done.
The BBC is also in the firing line. On Friday, Alex Salmond reportedly told a meeting of SNP members that Nicola Sturgeon won't underestimate BBC bias, as he puts it, when the next independence referendum is called.
And there was a tendency, especially for Reporting Scotland, to begin with bad news stories. more than...
During the last referendum, Professor John Robertson claimed there were more stories favouring the no campaign than the yes side. The BBC rejects those claims, and other academics take a different view.
You can't really judge balance or bias, in my view, by looking at the number of good stories or the number of bad stories for different sides. What you have to do is look at whether those stories have been accurately covered, and when they are covered, whether both sides have the opportunity to give their own point of view. But if, for example, you've got corruption as a story, and it relates to one particular party, then that story is going to be covered. You can't say we're not going to cover this corruption because we haven't got an equivalent story of corruption on the other side.
Mainstream broadcasters are facing other challenges. STV staff are to ballot for strike action after plans were announced to close the company's second channel and cut nearly 60 jobs. But one media executive thinks STV2 was always a highly speculative venture.
There was always a risk. There was a risk when they announced an international and national news programme too. Partly a risk of under-resourcing and partly a risk of whether or not the audience was there. So, you know, I wasn't wholly surprised by the STV2 closure. I think the shock has been really the number of journalistic jobs that have been taken out with that, because a lot of these job cuts aren't to do with the channel closure, they're really a cost-cutting measure.
With its legitimacy questioned and its funding squeezed, Scotland's mainstream media is under pressure like never before.